Never go to the Black Forest estate, Eleanor. Promise me." Those words, spoken with an intensity that bordered on desperation, were among the few demands my husband Marcus ever made during our 30 years of marriage. If you're here with me, take a second to like this video and subscribe so you don't miss what happens next, and tell me where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. Wherever you are, I hope you're safe, taking care of yourself, and staying well no matter what life looks like today. Let's continue. I had always respected that boundary, even when curiosity clawed at me during the long winter evenings when he'd briefly mention his German childhood on a property he had fled at 19. But now Marcus was gone, taken by a sudden stroke that no one, not even me, had seen coming. After 3 decades of shared breaths and silent understandings, I had become a widow at 60 with a daughter who looked at me through eyes clouded by resentment and a hollow space in my chest where my certainty used to live. Mrs. Sterling, the voice of Marcus's attorney, Mr. Vogel, pulled me from the suffocating fog of my own thoughts. We sat in his glass-walled office in downtown Atlanta, 3 weeks after the funeral. Outside, the Georgia humidity shimmered over the asphalt, but inside the air was clinical and cold, the finality of death reduced to neat stacks of paperwork and silver pens. There is one more item, Eleanor. Marcus gave specific instructions that this was to be handled separately from the primary estate. He slid a small, heavy wooden box across the mahogany desk. Inside lay an antique silver pocket watch, its casing tarnished by time but its weight substantial, and a sealed envelope with my name written in Marcus's elegant architectural handwriting. "What is this?" I asked, my thumb tracing the intricate engravings on the silver watch. "Your husband repurchased a significant property in the Black Forest region of Germany 5 years ago," Mr. Vogel explained, adjusting his spectacles. "According to his strictly notarized instructions, you were only to be informed of its existence and its transfer to your sole name after his passing. All taxes and maintenance costs have been prepaid for the next decade. A property in Germany?" I struggled to anchor myself to this new reality. Marcus had never owned so much as a vacation condo outside of our suburban home. It's known as the Glass Manor at Cypress Marsh. Apparently, it was his ancestral home, though the deed shows it passed through several corporate hands before he bought it back in secret. The marsh, the place he had forbidden me to ever visit, the place that had caused his gentle features to turn to stone whenever a stray memory drifted into conversation. "Mrs. Sterling, there is something else you should be aware of." Mr. Vogel lowered his voice, leaning in. "The property has become a subject of intense interest recently. We have already received several inquiries regarding its availability for acquisition." "Interest? It's an old estate in a remote forest." "Yes, but according to the geological reports Marcus commissioned 18 months ago, there are significant high-purity quartz and rare crystal deposits in the surrounding strata. Your husband declined 3 increasingly aggressive offers from international gemstone conglomerates before he died." My head spun. Marcus had never mentioned crystals, millions of dollars, or secret German deeds. We had lived comfortably on his salary as a senior architect and my modest income from a career I'd long ago paused, but we were far from the kind of wealth this implied. How had he afforded such a purchase without me knowing? And why keep me in the dark while he battled these corporate giants alone? I opened the envelope with trembling fingers, the scent of his cologne still faintly clinging to the paper. "My dearest Eleanor, if you are reading this, then the clock has run out for me sooner than I hoped. I am sorry. There is so much I should have told you, but I couldn't bring myself to let the shadows of my past dim the light of our present. The marsh is yours now. I have spent the last 5 years transforming it from the broken, dark place of my youth into something radiant, something worthy of the woman who taught me how to see the light. I know I made you promise never to go there. I am releasing you from that promise. In fact, I am asking you to go just once before you decide its fate. On the desk in the glass study is a tablet. The password is the date we got engaged, followed by your maiden name. I love you, Nora, more than the stars. Marcus. I clutched the letter to my chest, the silver watch pressing into my palm. Even from beyond the veil, Marcus was weaving a narrative I didn't recognize. I need to see this place, I said, my voice cracking but firm. I thought you might, Mr. Vogel nodded solemnly. But I must warn you, Marcus's brothers in Germany, Julian, Victor, and Sagilus, have already filed a formal contest to the will. They claim Marcus was of unsound mind and under undue stress when he repurchased the family land. They are arguing that the property belongs to the Sterling lineage, not to an American widow. That's absurd. Marcus was the most lucid man I've ever known. Nevertheless, given the newfound value of the mineral rights, they are prepared for a long legal war. They have local influence that we do not. I tucked the watch and the letter into my bag, a cold, sharp determination settling over me. I'm going to Germany, Mr. Vogel. Tonight. 48 hours later, after a blur of transatlantic flights and a long, winding drive through the dense, emerald canopy of the Black Forest, I found myself standing before imposing wrought iron gates. They were marked with the initials CM in elegant script. Beyond the gates stretched a landscape far more breathtaking than the broken home Marcus had described. There were rolling hills of pine, mist-shrouded valleys, and in the distance, a structure that defied the traditional timber-framed houses of the region. This was a manor made of stone, steel, and massive panes of reinforced glass, reflecting the moody German sky like a giant diamond dropped into the woods. This was no ruin. This was a masterpiece of modern architecture integrated into ancient soil. The silver watch felt warm in my pocket as I approached the gate's electronic lock. I entered the code, our anniversary, and the heavy iron swung open with a silent mechanical grace. As I drove up the gravel path, my heart hammered against my ribs. What part of himself had Marcus hidden here? The glass manor was a 2-story marvel. Nothing about it suggested the pain Marcus had associated with his childhood. It looked as though someone had taken a dark memory and bleached it with pure light. My hands shook as I reached the front door. The lock clicked, the seal broke with a soft hiss of air, and I stepped across the threshold into my husband's secret sanctuary. The interior took my breath away. It wasn't just the soaring ceilings or the minimalist beauty. It was the glass. Everywhere I looked, there were exquisite sculptures of hand-blown glass, prisms that caught the dim forest light and shattered it into 1,000 rainbows across the floors. There were intricate chandeliers that looked like frozen waterfalls and delicate glass flowers that seemed to bloom from the stone walls. My lifelong passion, the art I had set aside decades ago to support Marcus's career, was honored here in a gallery that felt like a cathedral dedicated to my lost dreams. And there, on a sleek glass desk overlooking the misty marshlands, sat a tablet with a single white lily laid across its screen. Before I could reach for it, the sound of tires on gravel shattered the silence. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, I watched a black SUV pull up behind my rental. 3 men stepped out, all bearing the unmistakable Sterling features: the high foreheads, the piercing gray eyes, the arrogant tilt of the chin. The Sterling brothers had arrived, and their expressions were as cold as the glass surrounding me. They hadn't come to mourn. They had come to reclaim what they believed was theirs. I stood my ground, clutching the silver watch, knowing that the war Marcus had tried to shield me from had finally reached my doorstep. The transition from the sun-drenched humidity of Georgia to the crisp, resinous air of the Black Forest was a shock to my system, a physical manifestation of the upheaval my life had undergone in a few short days. I steered the rental car through a labyrinth of narrow, winding roads where the trees leaned in so closely they seemed to whisper to one another in the wind. Marcus had always painted a picture of his childhood home as a place of shadows, a rotting, timber-framed ruin buried in the damp earth of a forgotten marsh. But as I rounded the final bend and the wrought iron gates appeared, my breath hitched. The initials CM were etched into the metal with a jeweler's precision. Beyond them lay a property that was not a ruin, but a revelation. I drove slowly up the gravel driveway, the sound of the stones crunching beneath the tires, echoing through the silent woods. The estate was far larger and more impressive than I had ever dared to imagine. Rolling hills of emerald moss gave way to stands of ancient cypress and silver fir trees, their needles glistening with the remnants of a morning mist. In the center of this pristine wilderness stood the manor itself. It was a masterpiece of modern architecture, a 2-story structure of dark local stone and massive floor-to-ceiling glass panes that reflected the forest back at itself like a giant fragmented mirror. This was no broken-down family farm. This was an estate of immense value and singular beauty, a sanctuary of light carved out of a history Marcus had described only as dark. The silver pocket watch Marcus had left me felt heavy in my palm as I stepped out of the car. The silence was absolute, broken only by the distant call of a black woodpecker. My hands shook as I approached the front door, a heavy slab of polished oak that seemed to grow directly out of the stone foundation. Beside the handle was a small circular indentation. I pressed the back of the antique watch into the slot, and a soft electronic chime resonated through the air. The heavy bolts retracted with a thud, and the door swung open on silent hinges. I stepped across the threshold, and for a moment I could only stand there, gripping the doorframe for support as the sheer scale of the interior hit me. The entryway opened into a soaring 2-story great room with exposed steel beams and a minimalist stone fireplace that reached toward a skylight. But it wasn't the architecture that stole my breath. It was the light, or rather, it was what Marcus had done with it. Everywhere I looked, the house was a gallery dedicated to my greatest love, the art of glass and light. In every corner, on every pedestal, and suspended from the ceiling were exquisite works of hand-blown glass and crystal. There were sculptures that captured the fluid motion of the sea, delicate prisms that shattered the afternoon sun into 1,000 dancing rainbows across the polished floors, and intricate glass flowers that seemed to bloom from the very shadows. My lifelong passion, the craft I had studied with such fervor before the realities of a quiet life had pushed my glass-blowing pipes into storage, surrounded me in a silent symphony of color and transparency. Marcus had known. He had always supported my interests, buying me books on Venetian glass and taking me to galleries in Atlanta, but I had never suspected he understood the depth of the void I felt. Here, in this secret world, he had built a monument to the artist I used to be. The level of detail was overwhelming. The way the prisms were angled to catch the specific light of the Black Forest, the way the glass reflected the dark water of the marsh outside. I felt a surge of grief so sharp it felt like a physical wound. Why had he kept this from me? Why spend 5 years and a fortune to build a dream in secret while I lived a predictable, simple life in Georgia? I walked deeper into the room, my footsteps echoing on the cool stone. My gaze drifted to a sleek, minimalist desk positioned in front of a vast window that overlooked the cypress marsh. The trees stood like sentinels in the fog, their roots submerged in the dark, still waters that Marcus had once called cursed. On the desk sat the tablet he had mentioned in his letter, its metallic surface gleaming under a glass chandelier that looked like a cluster of fallen stars. Beside it lay a single white lily, its petals pristine and fresh, as if someone had placed it there just hours ago to welcome me. Before I could reach for the device, the crunch of tires on gravel shattered the stillness of the afternoon. I froze, my hand hovering over the tablet. Looking through the vast glass wall, I watched a black SUV skid to a halt behind my rental car. The doors opened with synchronized thuds, and 3 men emerged. Even from a distance, the family resemblance was chilling. They were taller than Marcus, their frames broader, and their movements more aggressive, but they carried the same sharp, sterling jawline and the same piercing, hawk-like eyes. These were Marcus's brothers, Julian, Victor, and Silas. They didn't look like men coming to pay their respects to a grieving widow. They marched toward the house with the practiced confidence of owners returning to their rightful domain. I felt a surge of protective instinct. This was my husband's secret, his final gift to me, and these men were intruders in a sanctuary they were never meant to see. I quickly reached for the tablet and tucked it under my arm, my heart racing as the heavy thud of a fist echoed against the front door. "Eleanor!" Julian's voice boomed, muffled by the thick oak but unmistakable in its command. "Eleanor Sterling, we know you are inside. Open the door. We have matters of the family estate to discuss." I remained silent, backing away from the door and retreating into the shadows of the gallery where the glass sculptures acted as a fragile barrier. I looked at the silver watch in my hand, the tarnished metal, a cold reminder of the 30 years of trust I thought I had understood. Marcus's warning about his family had always been vague, but the intensity in his voice during those rare moments now made perfect sense. He hadn't just been protecting me from a place. He had been protecting me from these men. The knocking came again, louder and more insistent, shaking the very frame of the house. "Don't make this difficult, Eleanor," Victor shouted from the porch. "This property is Sterling land. You are an outsider playing a game you don't understand." I looked down at the tablet, realizing that whatever answers I needed were locked behind that screen. I moved to the desk, my fingers trembling as I prepared to enter the password. I knew I couldn't keep them out forever, but I wouldn't face them until I understood the weapon Marcus had put in my hands. The war for the glass manor had begun, and I was the only thing standing between Marcus's legacy and the brothers who had spent a lifetime trying to tear it down. I entered the date we had gotten engaged, followed by my maiden name, and held my breath as the screen flickered to life. "Would you like me to proceed with writing Chapter 3, covering the confrontation with the brothers and the discovery of the quartz deposits?" The men approached the house with the confident stride of people who believe they belong there. I quickly closed and locked the front door, my heart racing. Through the side window, I watched them pause on the porch, conferring among themselves before the oldest, a silver-haired version of Marcus with harder, colder eyes, rapped sharply on the oak. "Eleanor, we know you're in there. We should talk." His voice carried the same German accent that had always softened Marcus's speech when he was tired or upset. But here, it sounded like a jagged blade. I remained silent, backing away from the door. Marcus's warning about his family had always been vague but emphatic. Now, faced with their unexpected arrival, instinct told me to be cautious. The knocking came again, more insistent this time, vibrating through the heavy wood. "Eleanor, I'm Julian Sterling. These are our brothers, Victor and Silas. We're here about the estate." Of course they were. They weren't here about Marcus or to meet the wife their brother had loved for 30 years. They were here about the suddenly valuable property in the Black Forest. I glanced at the tablet on the desk. Whatever answers I needed might be there, not with the strangers on the porch. Ignoring the increasingly aggressive knocking, I moved to the desk, opened the computer, and entered the password. The date we met, followed by my maiden name. The screen came to life immediately, opening to a folder labeled "For Eleanor." Inside were hundreds of video files, each named with a date, starting from 2 weeks ago and extending a full year into the future. With trembling fingers, I clicked the first one. Marcus's face filled the screen. Not the thin, pale version from his final months, but healthy, vibrant, and clearly recorded some time ago. He smiled directly into the camera, that crooked grin that had always made my heart skip. "Hello, Nora. If you're watching this, then I'm gone, and you've come to the marsh despite my years of making you promise not to." He chuckled softly, a sound that brought a fresh wave of grief. "I should have known you wouldn't be able to resist, especially after Vogel told you about it." A lump formed in my throat. Even now, he knew me so well. "I've made a video for every day of your first year without me. 1 year of me keeping you company while you grieve. 1 year of explaining everything I should have told you while I was alive." He looked down briefly, then back at the camera with determination. "Starting with why I bought back the property I swore I'd never set foot on again." The knocking outside had stopped. Through the window, I could see the men returning to their vehicle, retrieving documents and conferring with stern expressions. Marcus continued. 5 years ago, I was diagnosed with chronic kidney failure. The doctors gave me 5 to 7 years. I chose not to tell you or Sarah. I didn't want pity, and I didn't want our final years overshadowed by death." His eyes softened. "I wanted to live fully with you until the end, not slowly die in front of you." Shock and anger surged through me. He'd hidden his diagnosis, made medical decisions without me, and denied me the chance to prepare or cherish our final moments knowingly. "I know you're angry right now," he said, as if reading my thoughts. "You have every right to be. But I hope you'll understand that I made this choice out of love, not deception." The men outside were making phone calls now, pacing the gravel drive with the frustrated energy of thwarted entitlement. When I got my diagnosis, I decided to use whatever time I had left to create something meaningful for you. You always loved working with glass, always talked about having a studio where you could capture the light. So I found the last place anyone would expect me to go, the marsh I'd fled at 19, vowing never to return. He leaned closer to the camera. What my brothers don't know is that I legally bought the property from our father before he died. The old man was broke after years of failed schemes, drinking away the Sterling family money. He sold it to me for a fraction of its worth, desperate for cash, swearing me to secrecy from my brothers, who still thought they would inherit it someday. This explained the legal challenge. They believed they had rights to property that Marcus had legitimately purchased. The estate was in ruins when I bought it, Nora, just like when I was a kid. But this time, I had the resources to transform it. Every business trip in the last 5 years, I was here overseeing the glasswork and the architecture, building something for you. Outside, the brothers had approached the door again. This time, the oldest, Julian, held a document against the window for me to see, a court order of some kind from a local German magistrate. My brothers will come for it, Marcus continued in the video, his expression hardening. They never wanted the marsh until 18 months ago, when significant high-purity quartz and rare crystal deposits were discovered in the region. Suddenly, the worthless property they'd mocked me for buying was valuable beyond measure. They'll try everything to take it from you. One of the brothers was on the phone again, his expression triumphant as he ended the call. In the bottom drawer of this desk is a blue folder with every legal document you need. The estate is unquestionably yours. I made sure of it. Marcus's face softened again. But Nora, whether you keep it or sell it is entirely your choice. I built this place for you, filled it with light for you, but I don't want it to become a burden. A vehicle was coming up the driveway, a police car with local German markings. The brothers watched its approach with satisfied expressions. One last thing, Marcus said. In the north wing, you'll find a workshop. The staff I've hired will continue to maintain the grounds whether you're here or not. They're my last gift to you, along with the means to enjoy them. The video ended, freezing on Marcus's smiling face, as knocking resumed at the door, more authoritative this time. Mrs. Sterling, local police, we need you to open the door, please. With a deep breath, I closed the tablet, retrieved the blue folder from the drawer, and went to face whatever came next. As I reached for the door handle, my phone rang. Sarah, our daughter, calling from Georgia. I hesitated, then answered. Sarah, now's not a good time. Mom? Her voice was tight with anger. Why didn't you tell me about Dad's estate in Germany or the quartz? His brothers just called me offering a fair settlement if I help them contest the will. What the hell is going on? So they'd reached out to my daughter already. The realization ignited something protective and fierce within me. They weren't just coming after me. They were trying to manipulate my grieving daughter. I'll explain everything later, I promised, watching the police officer exchange words with the Sterling brothers. But Sarah, don't sign anything. Don't agree to anything. These men are not our friends. Mom, if there's money involved— This isn't about money, I interrupted, surprising myself with the conviction in my voice. This is about what your father wanted. Please trust me on this. After a moment of silence, she sighed. Fine, but call me back as soon as you can. I hung up and opened the door to face a young German officer flanked by 3 Sterling men, whose expressions ranged from smug to openly hostile. Mrs. Sterling, I'm Officer Schmidt. These gentlemen have a request to inspect the property as part of an ongoing estate dispute. I smiled calmly, channeling the strength Marcus had always admired in me. Of course, officer, but first, I think you should see these. I held out the blue folder containing Marcus's documentation. My husband anticipated this exact situation. The heavy oak door closed behind the officer, and the Sterling brothers as they retreated to the driveway to review the legal filings, leaving me once again in the heavy silence of the glass manor. My heart was still hammering against my ribs, a frantic rhythm of adrenaline and grief. I looked down at the tablet in my hands, the silver-case device Marcus had left as my North Star in the sudden storm. I returned to the glass desk, the single white lily mocking the chaos outside with its serene purity. My fingers hovered over the screen. I needed to hear his voice again. I needed to understand the man who had built a cathedral of light while walking through the valley of the shadow of death. I entered the password again, and the folder titled For Eleanor reopened. I clicked the second video file, dated just a day after the first. Marcus appeared on the screen, seated in what looked like the very study where I now sat. The background showed the misty cypress marsh, but the interior was bathed in the warm, artificial glow of the glass chandeliers. He looked so remarkably alive that I reached out to touch the screen, my thumb tracing the familiar line of his jaw. "Hello, Nora," he began, his voice steady and resonant. "By now you've met Julian, Victor, and Silas. I imagine the encounter wasn't pleasant. My brothers have a way of making sunlight feel like a threat." He paused, a flicker of sorrow crossing his face. "I know you're reeling. I know you're questioning every year we spent together, wondering if our life in Georgia was a lie because of the secrets I kept here in Germany. But please, listen to me. Our life was the only truth I had. This place. This was my penance and my gift." He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk. "I told you about the kidney failure in the last message. 5 years, Nora. That's what they gave me. At first, I was paralyzed. I wanted to tell you everything, to crawl into your arms and let you carry the weight of it. But then I looked at you in our garden, laughing at some silly bird, and I realized I couldn't do that to you. I didn't want the next 5 years of your life to be a long, slow funeral. I didn't want you looking at me every day and seeing a dying man instead of your husband." I felt a sob rise in my throat, hot and bitter. He had traded my right to grieve with him for a hollow sense of normalcy. But Marcus continued, his eyes intense. "So, I went back to the only thing I knew, architecture. I decided that if my time was limited, I would spend it building a sanctuary for the one person who gave my life meaning. I bought the Cypress Marsh estate back from our father in a private sale. He was desperate, bleeding money from bad investments, and he hated my brothers enough to help me hide the transaction from them. He died 6 months later, taking the secret to his grave." Marcus shifted the camera, giving me a wider view of the room. The old house was a dark, suffocating box. It represented everything I hated about the Sterling legacy: secrecy, greed, and the coldness of the forest. I tore it down, Nora. Every stone, every rotted timber. I wanted to replace the darkness with glass. I wanted a house that didn't hide anything, a house that lived and breathed with the light. I spent every business trip over the last 5 years here, working with glass blowers from Murano and engineers from Berlin. I wanted to create a world where you could finally return to your art. I knew you'd stopped creating because you were busy taking care of us. This was my way of giving that time back to you." The video cut to a montage of the construction. Marcus in a hard hat, looking thinner but vibrant with purpose, standing amidst piles of translucent shards. I saw the glass gallery being installed, the way the prisms were calibrated to the specific angle of the Black Forest sun. It was a staggering labor of love, a multi-million-dollar project fueled by a ticking clock. The quartz, Nora. Marcus's voice returned as the camera focused back on him. I didn't know about the mineral deposits when I bought the land. I bought it for the memories I wanted to overwrite. But 18 months ago, a survey for a new well revealed high-purity quartz veins that extend deep under the marsh. It changed everything. My brothers found out through their contacts in the regional mining office. That's when the family visits started. They didn't want me. They wanted the dirt under my feet. They tried to buy me out. Then they tried to threaten me. When that didn't work, they started looking for legal loopholes in the sale. Julian is convinced I stole their inheritance. He sighed, looking exhausted for the first time in the recording. They will try to use Sarah. They know she's impulsive and that she misses me. They will play the family card, Nora. Don't let them. They aren't family. They are predators who share my DNA. Everything in the blue folder is airtight. The sale was legal, the taxes are paid, and the deed is in your name. You are the mistress of Cypress Marsh, and I have provided enough resources in the offshore accounts Vogel mentioned to ensure you never have to sell a single shard of glass unless you want to. Marcus leaned back, a small, sad smile playing on his lips. I've recorded 365 of these, Nora. One for every day of your first year. I'll be here with you, explaining the house, the marsh, and the people I've hired to protect you. I'm sorry I'm not there to hold your hand, but I hope this is the next best thing. Tomorrow, I'll tell you about the workshop in the North Wing. I think you'll find it familiar. I love you, Nora, more than the light. The screen went black, leaving my reflection staring back at me in the dark glass of the tablet. I sat in silence for a long time, the weight of his words pressing down on me. He had spent his dying years in a frantic race to provide for a future he wouldn't see, all while maintaining a facade of health at home. It was a beautiful, terrible, and utterly Marcus-like plan. A sharp rap on the window made me jump. I looked up to see Julian Sterling standing on the other side of the glass. He wasn't knocking on the door anymore. He was staring at me through the transparency of the house Marcus had built. He held a phone to his ear, his expression cold and calculating. He didn't look like a man who had lost a brother. He looked like a man who had found a treasure map and was waiting for the owner to step aside. I felt a new sensation bubbling up beneath my grief, a fierce, protective anger. Marcus had built the sanctuary to shield me from the darkness of his past, and I wouldn't let these men tarnish it with their greed. I looked at the blue folder on the desk, then at the tablet. Marcus had given me the map, the weapons, and his voice to guide me. I wasn't just a widow from Georgia anymore. I was the owner of the Glass Manor, and I had a year's worth of Marcus to help me fight back. I stood up, tucked the tablet into my bag, and walked toward the front door. The police officer was waiting there with the brothers, his expression neutral. It was time to stop hiding behind the glass. It was time to show the Sterling brothers that Marcus hadn't been the only strong one in our marriage. Would you like me to continue with Chapter 5, where Sarah arrives and the conflict between mother and daughter begins? I watched from the vast glass window as two vehicles navigated the winding gravel driveway of the Cypress Marsh estate. The first was the black SUV belonging to the Sterling brothers, but it was the silver Mercedes following closely behind that made my breath hitch. The car came to a halt, and Sarah emerged, looking exhausted yet defiant. She didn't walk toward the front door alone. Julian Sterling stepped out of his vehicle and immediately placed a comforting paternal hand on her shoulder, guiding her toward the house as if he were the one welcoming her home. Behind them, Victor and Silas followed like a grim honor guard. My daughter, the living image of Marcus with her dark hair and stubborn chin, was walking into my sanctuary flanked by the very men her father had spent his life escaping. The doorbell echoed through the soaring atrium, a sharp, crystalline sound that felt like a warning. I tucked the tablet into the desk drawer and moved to the entryway, smoothing my suit jacket. When I opened the heavy oak door, the humid air of the marsh drifted in, thick and heavy. "Mom," Sarah said, her voice trembling with a mixture of grief and accusation. She stepped inside, but before I could embrace her, she pulled back, her eyes darting around the magnificent glass and stone interior. Why is this the first time I'm seeing this? Why did Dad keep a palace in Germany a secret from me for 5 years? Before I could answer, Julian stepped across the threshold, his presence filling the room with an oily, unearned confidence. "It's a shock to all of us, Sarah," he said smoothly, his German accent polished and authoritative. "Your father was clearly not himself in his final years, reclusive, secretive, making erratic financial decisions. We are just glad you're here now to help us sort through this complication." "Julian, you were not invited inside," I said, my voice cold and level. I turned my gaze back to my daughter. "Sarah, I told you on the phone that these men are not our friends. They are here for the mineral rights, not for you." Sarah's face flushed a deep, angry red. "They're my family, Mom. Uncle Julian has been more open with me in the last 24 hours than you've been in years. He told me about the Sterling heritage, about how this land was supposed to be a legacy for all of us. He said Dad bought this place using family funds that were meant to be shared." "That is a lie," I countered, the anger bubbling beneath my ribs. "Your father bought this with his own hard-earned money to protect it from their greed. He left it to me so that I could ensure your future was secure, not so it could be liquidated by men who haven't spoken to him in decades." Victor Sterling stepped forward, opening a leather portfolio. "Eleanor, let's not be dramatic. We have a very reasonable proposal that Sarah has already had the chance to review. This estate is sitting on a fortune in high-purity quartz. It's too large for one woman to manage, and the legal fees to fight our contest of the will drain your resources before you ever see a dime of that wealth." "Uncle Julian says we can settle this as a family," Sarah interjected, her voice rising. "A 3-way split, 1/3 for you, 1/3 for me, and 1/3 for the Sterling brothers to manage the mining operations. It's millions of dollars, Mom. We could go back to Georgia, settle everything, and never have to worry again. Why are you being so stubborn? Is it because you want it all for yourself?" The words felt like a physical blow to the chest. To hear my own daughter echo the manipulative talking points of Julian Sterling was a pain I hadn't prepared for. I looked at the 3 brothers, Julian with his grandfatherly mask, Victor with his legal threats, and Silas watching silently from the back. They had found Sarah's weakest point, her feeling of exclusion from her father's secret life. They were feeding her a narrative where she was the victim of her parents' secrecy, and they were the benevolent relative stepping in to fix it. "Sarah, look at this house," I said, gesturing to the glass sculptures catching the afternoon light. "Does this look like the work of a man who was not himself? Your father spent 5 years meticulously designing every inch of this for us. He didn't tell us because he wanted to spare us the pain of his illness, not because he didn't trust us. And yet, he left the deed only in your name," Julian added, his voice dripping with false sympathy, "leaving poor Sarah with nothing but a promise. We are simply trying to ensure the girl gets what she deserves as a Sterling. A daughter shouldn't be a guest in her own father's house. I saw the way Sarah's posture changed at his words, her chin lifting in that defiant Sterling way. She was leaning into their orbit, drawn by the promise of a connection to a father she felt she'd lost twice, once to death and once to his secrets. "He's right, Mom," she whispered. "If Dad loved me, why am I not on the paperwork? Why did I have to find out about my own heritage from a stranger over a long-distance call?" "Because he knew they would do exactly what they are doing right now," I said, stepping closer to her. "He knew they would try to divide us. Sarah, please, stay here tonight. Let's talk, just the two of us, without them whispering in your ear." "We've already arranged for Sarah to stay at the village inn with us," Victor said, checking his watch. "We have an appointment with a local magistrate tomorrow to discuss the preliminary injunction. We thought it best for her to be in a neutral environment until we reach an agreement." "I'm going with them, Mom," Sarah said, refusing to meet my eyes. "I need to hear the whole story, not just your version. Julian has photos of Dad as a boy. He has records of the family history that you never bothered to tell me." I watched as they led her back toward the door. Julian gave me a small, triumphant smirk over his shoulder as he ushered her out. He had won the first skirmish. He had successfully weaponized my daughter's grief against me, turning her into a shield for their corporate interests. As the Mercedes and the SUV disappeared down the driveway, the silence of the glass manor felt oppressive, no longer a sanctuary but a gilded cage. I felt a hollow ache in my chest, a mixture of failure and fierce, protective rage. They were using my daughter's heart to get to the stones beneath my feet. I walked back to the glass desk and retrieved the tablet. I needed to see more. I needed to know if Marcus had foreseen this, if he had known that his own brothers would reach through the grave to pull our daughter into their darkness. "Ellis?" I called out, my voice echoing in the empty hall. The caretaker appeared from the kitchen wing, his expression grave. He had seen the entire exchange from the shadows. "They're efficient, Mrs. Sterling," Ellis said quietly. "They've been planning this since the moment they heard your husband was ill. They knew Miss Sarah would be the easiest way in." "I won't let them have her, Ellis," I said, my voice shaking but determined, "and I won't let them have this house. My husband didn't build a cathedral of light just so they could turn it into a dark pit in the ground." I opened the next video file on the tablet. Marcus's face appeared, and for the first time, he looked worried. It was as if he knew exactly what I was feeling at that very moment. I sat in the growing shadows of the great room, listening to the man who had seen the future, preparing myself for a war that was no longer just about property, but about the soul of my daughter. Would you like me to proceed to Chapter 6, where Catherine discovers the glass-blowing workshop and the hidden art Marcus preserved for her? The heavy thud of the front door closing behind Sarah and the Sterling brothers left a silence in the glass manor that felt like a physical weight. The shadows of the black forest pines lengthened, stretching across the polished stone floors like long, dark fingers reaching for the light. I felt a hollow ache in my chest, a mixture of maternal failure and a rising, protective fury. They had taken my daughter, using her grief as a skeleton key to bypass the legal walls Marcus had built. I walked back to the glass desk, my hands trembling as I picked up the tablet. I needed Marcus. I needed the man who had seen this coming, who had spent his final years playing a high-stakes game of chess against his own blood. I swiped through the video files until I found the one dated for the specific week of my arrival. Marcus appeared on the screen, seated in the very chair I now occupied. He looked tired, but possessed a strange, serene clarity in his eyes. "Hello, Nora," he began, his voice a low, steady anchor in the storm. "If you've just had your first real encounter with Julian and the others, you're likely feeling exhausted. You're probably wondering if anything in this house is worth the cost of the division they're sowing between you and Sarah." He paused, leaning forward as if he could see the tears blurring my vision. "I want you to leave the study. Go to the north wing, past the gallery of prisms. There's a door at the very end of the hall, unassuming and situated behind a decorative glass screen. The key is in the pocket of the watch I left you, the small silver skeleton key tucked into the inner casing." I stood up, my movements mechanical, and followed his instructions. I walked past the soaring great room, past the exquisite sculptures that now seemed like silent witnesses to my struggle. The north wing was quieter, the air cooler. I found the door, hidden perfectly behind a floor-to-ceiling panel of frosted glass. I pulled the silver watch from my pocket and found the hidden compartment Marcus had mentioned. The tiny key slid into the lock with a precise metallic click. I pushed the door open and stopped, my breath catching in my throat. I was standing in a fully equipped, professional-grade glass-blowing studio. It was a cavernous space bathed in perfect, consistent northern light from massive industrial-style windows. To my left were the glory holes, the reheating furnaces, lined with fresh fire brick. To my right were the marver plates, the pipe warmers, and a row of high-end annealing ovens. It was a masterpiece of functional design, every tool placed with a surgical understanding of the craft. I hadn't touched a blowpipe in 25 years. After Sarah was born and Marcus's firm took off, my someday had drifted further and further into the horizon until it became a bittersweet memory of a girl I used to be. The girl who dreamed of shaping light and heat into something permanent. The video continued on the tablet I held, Marcus's voice pulling me back to his guided tour. "You gave up your art for us, Nora. You traded the furnace for a kitchen and the blowpipe for a ledger to help me build my career. You never complained, never once let me see the regret, but I saw it every time we visited a gallery. I saw the way your hands moved, tracing the curves of the glass as if you were still feeling the glass on the pipe." He took a deep breath on the screen. "I always promised myself I'd give it back to you. I've spent the last 3 years sourcing the best equipment from Murano and Seattle. Everything is calibrated to your height, your reach, your style." Tears streamed down my face as I walked through the studio, my fingers brushing against the cool steel of the tools. The smell of beeswax and cooling metal filled the air, a scent that triggered a flood of dormant memories. But there was more. "Go to the archival cabinets at the back, Nora," Marcus urged. "Open the bottom drawer of the flat file." I crossed the room and pulled the heavy metal handle. Inside, wrapped in acid-free paper and protected by custom-milled foam, were my old sketches and the few pieces I had managed to keep from my senior thesis in college. I thought they had been lost in our move from Ohio to Georgia 2 decades ago. I had spent weeks mourning their loss, eventually convincing myself that it was better to start fresh by not starting at all. But Marcus had saved them. He had tracked down the pieces I'd sold to local shops. He had dug through the attic boxes I'd forgotten existed, and he had preserved them with the reverence of a museum curator. On top of the stack lay a small, translucent blue vase, the very first piece I'd ever successfully annealed. Tucked inside was a handwritten note in his precise architectural script. "She's still in there, Nora. The woman who saw colors in the dark, I've built the temple. Now you must bring the fire. I sank onto a stool, clutching the blue vase to my chest. The weight of his love was staggering, a deliberate counterbalance to the predatory greed of his brothers. He hadn't just left me money or land. He had returned my identity to me. He had seen the artist buried under 30 years of being a wife and a mother, and he had refused to let her die with him. The roar of a distant engine pulled me from the moment. I stood and looked out the north wing windows, which offered a view of the rugged, rocky terrain that stretched toward the mountains, the worthless land Julian had been so eager to exclude from his proposed settlement. I thought of the quartz deposits Marcus had mentioned. He had hidden this studio in the heart of the estate, surrounded by the very resources that made the land valuable to corporations, as if to remind me that the true wealth of Cypress Marsh wasn't what could be mined and sold, but what could be created. Tomorrow, Marcus's voice said as the video neared its end, I'll explain the security protocols for the studio. But for tonight, Nora, or just look at the light. Remember who you are before you go back out there to face them. You aren't just a sterling widow. You are a creator. And creators don't let others break what they've built. The video ended, the screen fading to black. I stood in the center of the silent workshop, the moonlight beginning to filter through the high windows, turning the glass tools into silver spears. I felt a shift in the air, a transition from the paralyzing grief of the last month to a cold, crystalline resolve. Julian and his brothers thought they were dealing with a woman they could break, a grieving widow who would crumble under the pressure of a legal battle and a rebellious daughter. They had no idea that Marcus had spent 5 years preparing me for this exact moment. He had given me the tools, the history, and now he had given me back my soul. I walked to the archival cabinet and took out a fresh sketchbook Marcus had left on the top shelf. I picked up a charcoal pencil, my hand moving with a muscle memory I thought I'd lost forever. I didn't draw the house or the marsh or even Marcus. I drew the sharp, jagged edge of a crystal, its facets designed to catch the light and turn it into a weapon. The battle for Cypress Marsh was no longer just about property or minerals. It was about protecting the man who had loved me enough to remember my dreams when I had forgotten them. As I locked the studio door and headed back to the main house, I saw a flicker of light near the equipment barn, a flashlight beam moving across the yard. The Sterling brothers were still circling, watching the house, waiting for a sign of weakness. I gripped the silver watch in my pocket, feeling the cold metal against my skin. They could watch all they wanted. Tomorrow, I was going to call my attorney and the geological experts Marcus had listed in his files. I was going to stop reacting and start building. I was going to show them exactly what happens when you try to take the light from a woman who knows how to handle the fire. The morning sun struggled to pierce through the dense fog of the black forest, casting a bruised purple light over the cypress marsh. I had spent the night in the glass-blowing studio, my mind a chaotic mosaic of Marcus's revelations and the sharp sting of Sarah's departure with the Sterling brothers. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Julian's triumphant smirk as he led my daughter away. They believed they had dismantled my defenses by turning my own blood against me. They thought I was a fragile relic of Marcus's past, clinging to a house I didn't understand. Mrs. Sterling, Ellis's voice was low, appearing at the studio entrance with a tray of black coffee. He looked as though he hadn't slept either. Your husband always said that the most dangerous moment in any conflict is when your opponent thinks they have already won. He expected Julian to target Miss Sarah. He expected the legal injunctions. I took the coffee, the warmth of the ceramic mug grounding me. He expected everything, didn't he, Ellis? But knowing it's coming doesn't make it any easier to watch. No, ma'am. But Marcus didn't just build a sanctuary here. He built a fortress. Ellis set the tray down and reached into his pocket, producing a heavy, weathered iron key that looked out of place in this modern, glass-filled manor. After the Sterling brothers made their first unannounced visit a year ago, while you were still in Georgia and Marcus was here supervising the installation of the kilns, he realized that a deed and a will wouldn't be enough to stop them. He spent the last 6 months of his life preparing what he called the insurance policy. I followed Ellis out of the north wing, past the pristine main stables where 2 black forest horses watched us with intelligent, dark eyes. We moved toward a weathered, rustic barn at the far edge of the property. Unlike the manor, this structure had been left in its original state, graying timber, moss-covered shingles, and a look of general neglect that made it appear entirely unimportant. The Sterling brothers don't even look at this building, Ellis remarked as he unlocked the heavy padlock. They think it's a relic of our father's failures. That was Marcus's intention. The interior smelled of old hay and dry rot. Dust motes danced in the thin beams of light filtering through the gaps in the wood. Ellis walked to the back corner, where a stack of heavy industrial crates was piled high. He shifted a false panel in the floor, revealing a reinforced steel trapdoor. He called this the war room, Ellis said, pulling the door open. A flight of clean concrete stairs descended into the earth. As I followed him down, a motion sensor triggered a bank of LED lights. I gasped. We were standing in a sophisticated, climate-controlled bunker. It was a stark, functional contrast to the artistic beauty of the manor above. One wall was covered in massive topographical maps of the Black Forest region, pinned with translucent overlays. Another wall was lined with steel filing cabinets, and a long desk held a multi-monitor computer setup. "What is all this, Ellis?" I asked, my voice echoing off the concrete walls. "Knowledge, Mrs. Sterling, and leverage." Ellis gestured to the maps. "First, look at the surveys." He pointed to the red-shaded areas. The Sterling brothers and their partners at Northern Extraction believe the quartz deposits follow the standard geological veins under the eastern pastures, the land they offered to let you keep in their settlement. But Marcus hired independent geologists to conduct deep strata resonance testing. They found that the mother lode, the highest purity quartz in Europe, actually runs directly beneath the northern marsh, the very land Julian called worthless rock and water. I stared at the map. Marcus had known the true value of the land was 10 times what the brothers imagined, and he had kept that information buried beneath a barn, waiting for the right moment. "But that's only half of it," Ellis continued, moving to the filing cabinets. He pulled out a thick, blue dossier. Marcus knew his brothers. He knew that even if you held the mineral rights, they would use their local political connections and their family history to tie you up in court for decades. So he spent years, long before he was even sick, collecting the truth about the Sterling family business. I opened the dossier and felt a chill that had nothing to do with the bunker's temperature. Inside were meticulous records of Julian's investment firm in Berlin, Victor's legal practice in Munich, and Silas's real estate holdings. There were bank statements, leaked internal emails, and sworn affidavits from former employees. "My God," I whispered, leafing through pages that detailed a 30-year history of systematic tax evasion, insider trading, and the misappropriation of client funds. Marcus had all of this? Why didn't he go to the authorities? Because he wanted peace more than vengeance, Ellis explained. He wanted to live his life with you in Georgia and forget these men existed, but he knew that if he ever died first, they would come for you like wolves. He collected this evidence as a deterrent. He told me once that the only way to deal with a bully is to hold a mirror up to their own crimes. I moved to the desk, where a series of digital folders were organized on the computer screen. Marcus had documented everything. The way the brothers had conspired to bankrupt their own father to force a sale of the estate, the way they had bribed local officials to overlook environmental violations on their other properties. It was a comprehensive map of their corruption. He anticipated their move on Sarah, too, Ellis said, pointing to a smaller folder. He knew they would play on her sense of being an outsider. There are records here of the things they said about her, and about you, behind your backs for years. He wanted you to have the truth if they ever tried to poison her mind. I sat in the ergonomic chair, surrounded by the weight of Marcus's foresight. He had lived 2 lives, one as the gentle, loving architect I knew in Georgia, and another as a silent guardian, building a vault of secrets to ensure my survival. I felt a profound sense of partnership with him. He was gone, but he was still here, standing beside me in this concrete room, handing me the weapons I needed to win a war I hadn't asked for. They think I'm a high school teacher from the suburbs who is out of her depth, I said, looking at the monitors. They think they can bully me into a settlement because I'm grieving. They have no idea who they are dealing with, ma'am, Ellis replied, a ghost of a smile appearing on his weathered face. Marcus always said you were the most strategic thinker he'd ever met. He just worried you were too kind to use it. The kindness ends today, Ellis. I stood up, the antique silver watch in my pocket feeling like a badge of office. I want you to arrange a meeting. I want my attorney, the independent geologists, and most importantly, I want a representative from Western Plains Energy, the primary rival of the company the Sterlings are working with. And your brothers-in-law? Oh, we'll meet them too, but not until I've secured the high ground. I looked back at the dossiers one last time. Marcus gave me the fire in the studio, and he gave me the ammunition in this bunker. It's time to show the Sterling brothers that the outsider they've been mocking is the one who holds their lives in her hands. As we left the war room and concealed the entrance, the fog over the cypress marsh began to lift, revealing the jagged, beautiful landscape beneath. The Sterling brothers thought they were the predators, but they hadn't realized that Marcus had spent 5 years training me to be the one who would finally bring their house of cards down. I walked back to the manor with a new, icy resolve. The battle for Cypress Marsh was about to change, and for the first time since Marcus died, I wasn't afraid. The morning mist was still clinging to the dark surface of the Cypress Marsh when I arranged to meet Sarah. I chose a small, quiet cafe in the nearest village, a neutral space 20 minutes away from the oppressive grandeur of the manor and the toxic influence of the Sterling brothers. I arrived early, my heart heavy with the weight of the digital weapon I carried in my bag. Sarah arrived 15 minutes late, her posture defensive, her eyes scanning the room as if she expected an ambush. She sat down across from me, her chin tilted in that stubborn, Sterling way that always reminded me of Marcus, yet her hands were trembling as she reached for the menu. "I can't stay long, Mom," she said, her voice sharp with a brittleness she tried to mask. "Uncle Julian is taking me to meet the estate's primary legal counsel this afternoon. They're helping me understand my rights as a direct heir." "Uncle Julian?" I repeated softly, the name tasting like ash. You've become quite close to a man you didn't know existed 4 days ago. She flushed, her gaze snapping to mine. They've been welcoming, Mom. They've shared stories about Dad that you never did. They told me about the sterling history, about how Dad was the one who walked away and left them to deal with the family's declining fortunes. They made me feel like I belonged to something bigger than just a quiet life in the suburbs. I sipped my coffee, choosing my next words with the surgical precision Marcus had taught me. Sarah, do you remember that art history course you took during your sophomore year? The one where the professor talked about perspective? How where you stand completely changes the truth of what you see. What does that have to do with anything? She snapped, looking toward the door. It means you've only seen the perspective they've curated for you, I said, leaning forward. I'm asking you to consider that there is another view, your father's view, the man who actually raised you, who loved you, and who spent 30 years making sure those men never had the chance to touch your life. Dad is dead, she said bluntly, pain flashing across her face. And he obviously didn't trust me enough to tell me about any of this while he was alive. He kept me in the dark, Mom. They're the ones turning the lights on. I reached into my bag and withdrew the tablet, placing it on the small wooden table between us. Actually, Sarah, he left something for both of us. He knew he was dying. He was diagnosed 5 years ago with chronic kidney failure. He chose not to tell us because he wanted to spare us the agony of watching him fade. He wanted our last years to be about living, not mourning. Her face went pale, her defensive posture sagging for a fleeting second. He knew for 5 years. That's impossible. He would have told me. Watch the video, Sarah. Hear it from him. He knew exactly what Julian and the others would do the moment he was gone. With trembling fingers, she pressed play on the file labeled, "For Sarah when she needs it." Marcus's face appeared on the screen, vibrant and healthy, his eyes crinkling with the smile that had always been her anchor. "Hello, my brilliant girl," he began, his voice warm and intimate. "If you're watching this, then I'm gone. And knowing you, you're probably furious about the secrets I kept. You never did like being the last to know, even when you were a toddler." A tear escaped Sarah's eye, rolling down her cheek as she watched her father. Marcus's expression on the screen turned somber. "I should have told you I was sick. I should have given you the chance to ask all your questions. But I was selfish. I wanted our time together to be normal. I hope someday you'll forgive me for that. But there's something else you need to know, Sarah. Something about my brothers that I never shared because I didn't want their darkness to touch you." The video shifted as Marcus leaned closer to the lens. Our estrangement wasn't a petty squabble. When I was 19, after our mother left, my brothers conspired to embezzle my portion of our mother's private trust. They forged my signature on fraudulent loan documents while I was away at university. When I discovered it and threatened to go to the authorities, they told me they had framed the records to make it look like I was a willing participant. They gave me a choice: walk away with nothing and stay silent, or go to prison with them. Sarah's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with horror. Marcus continued, his voice hardening. "I left Germany, I changed my name slightly, and I built a life with your mother. It was the best decision I ever made. But my brothers never changed. They stayed in that marsh, feeding on greed. Whatever they're telling you now, whatever heritage they're promising, remember this: they don't want a niece. They want a legal wedge to split the mineral rights. They've wanted control of this land for decades, and they will use you to get it." The video ended, the screen fading to black. Sarah sat motionless, The sounds of the cafe, the clinking of spoons, the murmur of distant conversation, seeming to exist in another world. Tears were streaming silently down her face. "He was protecting us," she whispered. "All this time, it wasn't just about the illness." "He knew them, Sarah," I said gently, reaching across the table to cover her hand with mine. "He knew that the moment he wasn't here to stand in their way, they would look for the easiest path to the wealth beneath that land. And they saw you as that path. They played on your grief, on your feeling of being excluded, to turn you into an ally against the very thing your father built for you." She wiped her eyes, her expression shifting from devastation to a cold, familiar anger. "They've been lying to me. Every story about the family, every word about Dad walking away, it was all to make me feel like they were the ones who stayed. They stayed because they were waiting for the courts," I said. "They didn't want the land when it was a ruin. They only wanted it when it became valuable. They've excluded the western section from their proposal because that's where the highest purity deposits are. They were trying to cheat both of us while making you feel like a partner." Sarah straightened her back, her eyes flashing with a fierce determination that was pure Marcus. The vulnerability was gone, replaced by the analytical mind of the daughter he had raised. "They think I'm a child they can manipulate with a few old photos and a fancy car," she said, her voice steadying. "They think I'm going to help them take Dad's work away from you." "Are you?" I asked. "Mom, I never wanted to be against you. I felt so lost." She squeezed my hand, her grip tight. "What do we do now? They're expecting me at the lawyer's office in 2 hours. I smiled, a sense of triumph blooming in my chest for the first time since I'd arrived in Germany. "We do exactly what your father would do. We think 3 Bach ahead. We don't tell them you know. You go to that meeting, you listen, and you collect every piece of information they give you. And then we meet with our own team." "Our own team?" "I've spent the last 24 hours in your father's war room," I told her. "He left us everything we need: geological surveys, financial records of their crimes, and a contact at Western Plains Energy. They think they're dealing with a grieving widow and a naive girl. It's time we showed them exactly who the Sterlings really are." Sarah laughed, a genuine, sharp sound that cut through the tension. "Dad always said you were the smartest person in the room. He said if anyone ever made the mistake of underestimating you, they'd never see the hit coming. Let's prove him right," I said. As we walked out of the cafe together, the bond between us was no longer frayed by secrets, but forged in the truth Marcus had left behind. The Sterling brothers believed they had divided us, but they had only succeeded in creating their own worst nightmare: 2 women with nothing left to lose, and the full weight of Marcus's legacy behind them. The war for Cypress Marsh had just become very, very personal. The Sterling brothers arrived at the Cypress Marsh estate exactly when I expected, at 10 o'clock sharp, 3 days after my transformative meeting with Sarah. Their black SUV crunched up the gravel driveway with the heavy, unearned confidence of men who believed victory was merely a formality, a final signature away. Behind them followed a sleek silver Mercedes I didn't recognize, likely carrying their specialized attorney or a high-level financial advisor. I watched them from the great room window, dressed not in the casual traveling clothes they had seen previously, but in a tailored charcoal suit I had purchased specifically for this confrontation. Appearances matter when staging a coup, and I intended to present myself not as a grieving widow, but as the formidable opponent Marcus had always known me to be. "They're here," I called out to Sarah, who emerged from the kitchen wing looking equally professional in a dark blue dress. On her wrist, she wore her father's vintage watch, its silver face catching the light, a silent, powerful statement of where her loyalty now resided. "Are you ready?" she asked, a flicker of nerves and fierce determination warring in her expression. "Completely," I replied, squeezing her hand. "Remember, let them talk themselves into a corner first. We let them reveal the depth of their greed before we strike." Ellis appeared from the back of the house, his weathered face set in a grim mask of satisfaction. "The others have arrived through the service entrance, Mrs. Sterling. They are set up in the formal dining room as you requested." I nodded in appreciation. Everything was in place for the performance. The doorbell rang, and Ellis moved to answer it with the practiced deference of a caretaker who knew his role in this carefully choreographed trap. "Good morning, gentlemen," I heard him greet them in the hall. "Mrs. Sterling and Miss Sarah are expecting you. This way, please." They entered the dining room with the easy entitlement of men accustomed to controlling every room they walked into. Julian led the way, followed by Alan with his ever-present leather portfolio and Silas bringing up the rear. Behind them walked a silver-haired man in an expensive Italian suit who radiated the cold corporate authority of the extraction industry. "Eleanor," Julian nodded, a condescending smile touching his lips, but failing to reach his calculating eyes. "We appreciate you agreeing to this meeting. We thought it might be productive to have an industry expert join our final discussion. This is Harrison Wells, CEO of Northern Extraction." So, they had brought an oil and mineral executive to intimidate me with technical jargon and market valuations. It was a predictable move. "How thoughtful," I replied pleasantly, gesturing to the long mahogany table. "I've had the dining room prepared. Please sit. I believe we have much to discuss regarding the future of this property." As they settled into their chairs, expressions of smug confidence firmly in place, I remained standing at the head of the table. "Before we begin," I said, my voice steady and clear, "I want to thank you for your previous settlement proposal. It was educational." Julian's smile widened, clearly interpreting my comment as an admission of defeat. "We're pleased you've had time to consider our offer, Eleanor. With Mr. Wells' expertise, we can discuss the most advantageous arrangement for dividing the property's assets fairly." "Yes, division," I mused, picking up a remote control from the table. "That's precisely what I'd like to discuss." I pressed a button, and a hidden screen descended from the ceiling at the far end of the room. The brothers exchanged surprised, uneasy glances. Clearly, they hadn't expected this level of technological preparation. "If you'll direct your attention to the presentation," I continued, clicking the remote. A detailed topographical map of Cypress Marsh appeared on the screen, showing property boundaries and geological formations in high resolution. "This is the complete survey of the estate. All 2,200 acres, not just the eastern 800 acres mentioned in your proposal." Alan shifted uncomfortably in his chair, clearing his throat. "The northern and western sections are essentially undevelopable rocky terrain and swamp, Eleanor. We excluded them from the initial proposal for simplicity's sake." "How considerate," I smiled, though there was no warmth in it, except for one small detail. Another click, and the map was overlaid with heat signature deposit locations, the complete geological survey from Marcus's secret war room. It showed the massive, high-purity quartz reserve concentrated directly beneath the worthless northern marsh. Harrison Wells straightened abruptly, his professional mask slipping as he leaned forward to study the projection with sudden, intense interest. As you can see, I continued calmly, the primary deposit, the mother lode, extends predominantly beneath the northern section, the very acres you so generously offered to exclude from our fair division. Julian's face flushed a deep, angry red. These surveys are unreliable, Eleanor. Northern Extraction's analysis indicates— Actually, interrupted a new voice as the connecting door to the library opened, those surveys have been verified by 3 independent geological teams and are far more accurate than anything Northern Extraction has produced. The Sterling brothers turned in shock as Thomas Reeves, the CEO of Western Plains Energy, Northern Extraction's primary international competitor, entered the room, followed by my attorney and 2 forensic accountants. "What is the meaning of this?" Julian demanded, half rising from his chair, his voice trembling with suppressed rage. "This," I said, my voice hardening, "is a meeting about the true value and the legal future of Cypress Marsh. Mr. Reeves has expressed significant interest in the property's potential, particularly after reviewing the complete geological data my husband compiled." Harrison Wells shot a betrayed, furious glance at the Sterling brothers. "You told me you had exclusive negotiating rights to this land, Julian. You told me the widow was ready to sign." "They have no rights at all," my attorney interjected smoothly, placing a stack of documents on the table. "Mrs. Sterling holds clear, uncontested title to the entire property, including all mineral rights. The documents you've been shown by the Sterling brothers, Mr. Wells, have no legal standing whatsoever. They are, in fact, based on a fraudulent claim of mental incompetence that we are prepared to challenge in open court." Julian slammed his hand on the table. "This property has been in the Sterling family for generations. Marcus had a moral obligation to return it to the bloodline." "Moral obligations?" Sarah spoke for the first time, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "Like the moral obligation you had to my father when you forged his signature and stole his inheritance when he was 19? Or the obligation you had to me when you lied to my face 3 days ago about family heritage just to get me to sign a wedge agreement?" The brothers froze, the color draining from their faces as they realized Sarah was no longer their pawn. "Perhaps these will clarify the situation," I said, nodding to the forensic accountants who distributed sealed envelopes to everyone at the table. Copies of documentation my husband preserved regarding certain historical transactions involving Sterling family assets. I believe the statute of limitations remains active on several of these offshore transfers, and the German financial regulatory authorities might find the insider trading records quite illuminating. Alan opened his envelope, his hands shaking as he scanned the contents. "These are private family matters," he sputtered. "They are irrelevant to the land deed." "On the contrary," I countered, finally taking my seat at the head of the table, "they establish a pattern of fraudulent behavior that directly impacts your credibility. Behavior that continued when you deliberately misled Mr. Wells about your standing to negotiate. You didn't come here to honor Marcus. You came to scavenge." The room fell into a heavy, suffocating silence. The Mitchell brothers, no, the Sterling brothers, looked at one another, their confident facade utterly shattered. Marcus had documented everything, their crimes, their greed, and their lies. Harrison Wells stood abruptly, adjusted his jacket, and looked at Julian with pure disgust. "I believe my company's involvement in this matter has been based on fraudulent information. I'll be in touch with my own legal team. Good day, Mrs. Sterling." As the door closed behind the rival CEO, I looked at the three men who had tried to break my family. I want you to leave this house, I stated, my voice echoing in the grand room. I want you to cease all contact with my daughter. In exchange, these documents stay in this room. If you ever contest this will again, or if you so much as step foot on this gravel driveway, I will hand every dossier to the federal prosecutor in Berlin. Robert, Julian, looked at me, his eyes hollow. He had lost the land, the oil, and the leverage. He had underestimated the quiet teacher, and in doing so, he had handed me the keys to his own destruction. I stood up, watching them retreat toward the SUV, defeated by the very man they had spent a lifetime trying to erase. Marcus had won, and through me, his legacy was finally secure. The dust from the Sterling brothers' rapid departure had barely settled on the gravel driveway when the atmosphere inside the dining room shifted from a battlefield to a sanctuary of professional resolve. I stood at the head of the mahogany table, no longer the target of a predatory corporate takeover, but the undisputed mistress of Cypress Marsh. Thomas Reeves, the CEO of Western Plains Energy, remained seated, his expression one of quiet admiration. He had watched the dismantling of Julian and Victor with the keen eye of a man who valued strategic brilliance over brute force. Beside him, my attorney began clearing away the aggressive, predatory contracts the Sterling brothers had tried to force upon me, replacing them with a thick, leather-bound folder embossed with the Western Plains seal. "That was a masterful display, Eleanor," Thomas said, his voice resonant and respectful. "Your husband always told me that you possessed a clarity of mind that few in my industry could match. He said you would be the one to ensure this land was treated as a legacy, not just a line item on a balance sheet." I looked out the window toward the northern marsh, where the mist was finally lifting to reveal the rugged beauty of the ancient forest. "Marcus didn't build this house just for the wealth beneath it, Mr. Reeves. He built it as a temple of light and glass. I have no intention of letting it be turned into a scarred, industrial wasteland by men who only see dollar signs in the dirt." We began the formal negotiation, but it was unlike any business meeting I had ever witnessed. Marcus had spent the last 18 months of his life vetting Western Plains Energy, choosing them specifically because of their pioneering work in non-invasive deep strata extraction. Unlike the Sterling brothers' partners at Northern Extraction, who utilized traditional open-pit methods that would have gutted the forest and drained the marsh, Western Plains utilized high-frequency resonance and horizontal micro-drilling. It was a more expensive, slower process, but it left the surface of the earth virtually untouched. "My conditions are non-negotiable," I stated, sliding my own addendum across the table. "The extraction must remain confined to the northern rocky terrain, at least 5 miles from the main house and the glass studio. You will utilize the sustainable water recycling loop Marcus outlined in his notes, and a significant percentage of the royalties will be directed into a permanent trust for the restoration of the Black Forest cypress population." Thomas Reeves studied the document, nodding slowly. "These terms are highly unusual, Mrs. Sterling. Most landowners in your position would be focused on the immediate payout, especially given the current market value of high-purity quartz. You are effectively choosing a lower profit margin for the sake of environmental stewardship." "I am choosing a future over a payout," I countered. "This land was a place of darkness for my husband for 30 years. I will not allow it to become a place of destruction now. If your company cannot commit to the ethics of the land, I will find someone who will, or I will let the quartz stay in the ground for another 1,000,000 years." There is no need for that, Reeves replied, a genuine smile breaking through his professional mask. Marcus knew exactly what he was doing when he recommended we speak. We accept your terms, Eleanor. We want to prove that the industry can coexist with a sanctuary like this. As I signed the final page of the contract, a profound sense of relief washed over me. The pen strokes felt like a shield being placed over the estate. With Sarah witnessing the document as my primary heir, the legal and financial foundation of Cypress Marsh was finally anchored. The predatory claims of the Sterling brothers were now effectively nullified by a superior, legally binding international partnership. I was no longer a widow defending a house. I was a partner in a legacy that would protect this land long after I was gone. Once the executives and lawyers departed, leaving only Sarah, Ellis, and me in the quiet house, I felt the true weight of the victory. I walked onto the wide stone porch, the cool German air filling my lungs. The black SUV was gone, and with it, the suffocating presence of Marcus's past. I turned to Ellis, who was standing by the door, his eyes bright with a rare, unshed emotion. They won't be coming back, Ellis. I've made sure of it. The injunctions are being filed in Berlin as we speak, and the evidence of their fraud is being held in escrow. They are barred from this property for life. You did more than just protect the property, ma'am, Ellis said quietly. You protected his memory. He spent his final days worried that they would turn his gift into a curse. You've ensured that the light stays in the glass. Sarah came to stand beside me, wrapping her arm around my waist. The anger and confusion that had clouded her eyes for the past week had vanished, replaced by a quiet, steady pride. I'm sorry, Mom, she whispered, forever doubting you, for letting them make me feel like Dad didn't love me. Seeing this, seeing how he prepared for every step of our safety, it's the most love I've ever seen. He saw the best in both of us, Sarah, I said, leaning my head against hers. He saw a daughter who was strong enough to handle the truth, and a wife who was capable of defending it. He didn't hide this from us to keep us out. He hid it to keep the wolves away until we were ready to face them. That afternoon, I performed the final act of reclamation. I walked to the edge of the property where the Sterling family crest had been carved into an old stone marker near the gate. It was a symbol of the old regime, the secrecy, the greed, and the coldness that had driven Marcus away. With the heavy mallet I'd borrowed from the studio, I struck the stone. It didn't shatter, but the crest was marred, the sharp lines of the Sterling hawks blunted by the force of my resolve. I wasn't erasing the family name. I was still a Sterling by marriage. I was erasing the power that name held over the specific piece of earth. I returned to the house and walked through each room, my footsteps sounding different now. They were the steps of an owner, a creator, and a protector. I stopped in the great room, looking at the soaring glass walls and the intricate sculptures. The light was changing as the sun began its descent, turning the glass from brilliant gold to a deep, ethereal violet. For 30 years, Marcus had been my protector, the man who handled the world so I could live in comfort. Now, the roles had reversed. He was the one who needed protecting, and I had fulfilled that duty. I sat at the glass desk and opened the tablet. Today's video awaited me. I pressed play and Marcus appeared, looking out at the same marsh I had just been contemplating. Hello, Nora, he said, his voice a warm caress. If you've reached this day, then the dust has settled. You faced the brothers, and you've stood your ground. I know it wasn't easy. I know the cost of the conflict. But look around you, Nora. The house is still standing. The light is still there. And most importantly, you are still there." He smiled, a look of pure, unadulterated peace. "You are the mistress of Cypress Marsh now, not because I gave it to you, but because you earned it. Tomorrow we stop talking about the war, and we start talking about the art. I can't wait to see what you create in that studio." The video ended, and for the first time since the funeral, I didn't cry. I felt a sense of purpose that transcended grief. The money from the quartz would provide for Sarah and our future generations, but the integrity of the land was the true inheritance. I had balanced the scales of profit and conscience, and in doing so, I'd finally made the Cypress Marsh a home. I was no longer a guest in Marcus's secret. I was the architect of our future. As the moon rose over the black forest, casting silver light across the glass manor, I knew that the battle was over. The legacy was safe, and the light was mine to keep. Winter descended on the Cypress Marsh with a dramatic, predatory beauty. Pristine snowfall blanketed the rolling pastures of the Black Forest estate, turning the dark cypress trees into towering white sentinels. Ice crystals formed delicate, fractal patterns on the massive glass panes of the manor, and smoke curled from the stone chimney into a sky so blue it looked like polished sapphire. I had decided to stay through the season rather than return to Georgia, drawn by a primal need to experience the full cycle of the land Marcus had reclaimed. Sarah had reluctantly returned to her life in Atlanta, her marketing firm unwilling to extend her leave indefinitely, but our daily ritual continued via video calls. We watched Marcus's messages together, his recorded presence binding us across 3,000 miles and the boundary of death. 4 months had passed since the defeat of the Sterling brothers. True to our legal settlement, they had maintained a resentful distance, though my attorney occasionally forwarded clinical communications from their representatives regarding property boundaries as Western Plains. Energy began their non-invasive preliminary work. I had settled into a rhythm of restoration, spending my mornings in the glass-blowing studio and my afternoons overseeing the ecological trust. The peace was hard-won and fragile, but it was mine. The disruption came on a Tuesday morning, heralded by the crunch of tires on fresh snow. I watched from the great room window as the familiar black SUV navigated the winding driveway. My heart tightened with a familiar, instinctive dread. I called Ellis immediately. "They're at the gate, Ellis. All 3 of them." "I see them, Mrs. Sterling." His voice came over the intercom, grim and steady. "They claim it is a personal family emergency, not a legal matter. Should I deny them entry?" I hesitated, looking at the silver watch on the mantel. "No, let them approach the main house, but keep security on standby. I want this handled quickly." When the door opened, the 3 brothers entered, not with the arrogant entitlement of our previous meeting, but with a hushed, desperate energy that felt far more dangerous. Julian, the eldest, looked shockingly diminished. His skin was a waxy grayish hue, and he leaned heavily on a cane, his breathing labored in the crisp air. Victor and Silas flanked him, their usual predatory confidence replaced by a somber, calculating urgency. They brought with them 2 strangers, a man carrying a medical bag and another holding a sleek leather portfolio. "Eleanor," Julian said, his voice a rasping shadow of the boom it once had. "Thank you for seeing us. We wouldn't be here if the situation weren't terminal." I didn't offer them tea or seats. I stood by the fireplace, the warmth of the flames at my back. "I'm listening, Julian. But make it brief. I have the same condition that took Marcus, Julian began, gesturing to the man with the medical bag. Hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. It is the Sterling curse, it seems. My heart is failing, Eleanor. The specialists in Berlin give me 6 months, perhaps less, without a transplant. I am sorry to hear of your illness, I said, my voice neutral. But I fail to see what this has to do with Cypress Marsh. Victor stepped forward, his legalistic mask slipping to reveal a raw, naked desperation. It's about compatibility, Eleanor. Our family has an exceptionally rare blood type and specific tissue markers. Julian has been on the international registry for a year with no matches. We've all been tested. Silas and I are not compatible, but because of the direct genetic line, there is a high statistical probability that Sarah is a match. The room seemed to tilt on its axis. The audacity of the request hit me like a physical blow. After attempting to defraud my daughter, manipulate her grief, and steal her inheritance, they had returned to ask for her very flesh and blood. You want my daughter to be tested as a donor for you, I clarified, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous register. Just a preliminary blood test, the doctor, a man introduced as Dr. Harmon, interjected. If she's a match, we would discuss a partial liver or kidney donation. Given the regenerative nature of these organs and her youth, the risk to her would be manageable, while it would be a life-saving miracle for Mr. Sterling. A miracle for the man who tried to turn her against her mother? I countered, the anger finally breaking through my calm. A miracle for the family that treated her father like a criminal for 30 years? Julian sank into a chair, his cane clattering to the floor. I know what we did, Eleanor. I am not asking for forgiveness. I am asking for life. We are Sterling blood. That has to mean something when a life is on the line. It meant nothing to you when Marcus was alive, I reminded him harshly. We didn't know he was sick, Silas shouted from the back, his face flushed. He hid it from us just as he hid everything else. He hid it to protect us from you, I shot back. And now you want me to hand over my daughter to the very wolves he feared most? The silence that followed was heavy with the weight of decades of betrayal. I looked at Julian, the man who shared Marcus's eyes, but none of his soul. Part of me wanted to laugh at the cosmic irony of it all. They had spent their lives trying to take from Marcus, and now the only thing that could save them was the one thing they couldn't steal. I won't make this decision for her, I said finally, my hands clenched at my sides. Sarah is 27 years old. She is a woman of her own mind. But I will tell you this. I will provide her with the full truth. I will tell her about your request, and I will also remind her of every lie you told her in this very room 6 months ago. I will not shield you from your own history to make her choice easier. Time is against us, Eleanor, Victor pleaded. Every day we wait. His heart grows weaker. Then you should have led with the truth a year ago, I said. You should have built a bridge instead of a trench. You can't burn a house down and then ask the people inside for a place to sleep. As Ellis ushered them out, Julian looked back at me, his eyes hollow and haunting. I felt a fleeting, agonizing pang of compassion. The Sterling curse was a shared tragedy after all, but it was quickly overwhelmed by the fierce, maternal instinct to protect my child from their parasitic reach. That evening, I sat in the war room beneath the barn, the concrete walls offering a sense of cold, clinical security. I searched through Marcus's digital files, looking for anything related to the family's medical history. In a folder labeled The Genetic Debt, I found what I was looking for. Marcus had documented the rare markers, the failed matches, and the potential for exactly this scenario. He had known Julian might one day face this. But there was one more file, a sealed document I hadn't opened before. It was titled A Last Resort. Inside was a letter addressed to Julian and a set of contact details for a private investigator in Saskatoon, Canada. My breath hitched as I read the summary. Marcus hadn't just tracked the courts, he had tracked the family. He had discovered that their father had fathered another child, a half-sibling they never knew existed, long after their mother had left. A brother who shared their rare blood but none of their malice. Marcus had held this secret as his final insurance policy. He had provided a way for Julian to be saved without ever having to touch Sarah. He had given me the means to be merciful without sacrificing our daughter. I sat in the silence of the bunker, the weight of Marcus's foresight overwhelming me. He had anticipated their desperation, their illness, and their eventual return. He had given me the power to save his brother's life while keeping our daughter safe. It was the ultimate expression of his love, a legacy that provided not just wealth, but the chance for redemption and the ultimate protection of our child's future. I picked up the phone to call Sarah, knowing that tomorrow, the war for Cypress Marsh would reach its final transformative conclusion. The final spring at Cypress Marsh arrived not with a whisper, but with a symphony of melting ice and the rhythmic dripping of ancient pines. The black forest was shedding its white winter shroud, revealing a carpet of moss so vibrant it looked like spilled emerald ink. I stood in the grand atrium of the glass manor, the morning sun streaming through the floor-to-ceiling panes, turning the house into a giant prism. 6 months had passed since the Sterling brothers had come to me in desperation, seeking Sarah's blood to save Julian's failing heart. That confrontation had felt like the final tremor of an earthquake that had begun the day Marcus died. But today, the ground finally felt solid beneath my feet. The revelation from Marcus's last resort file had changed everything. After that frozen morning in the parlor, I had not called Sarah to ask for her sacrifice. Instead, I had summoned Julian, Victor, and Silas back to the manor one last time. I had sat them down in the war room, the concrete bunker they never knew existed, and handed them the dossier Marcus had compiled. I watched their faces as they processed the truth, that their father had fathered another son, a half-brother named Thomas, living quietly in Saskatoon, Canada. Marcus had tracked him down years ago, confirming that Thomas shared the rare Sterling blood markers, but had been spared the toxic environment of the Black Forest estate. "He is your match," I had told Julian, whose eyes were hollow with a mixture of shock and burgeoning hope. "Marcus found him so that Sarah would never have to be your first choice. He gave you a way out that didn't involve preying on his daughter." I had facilitated the connection, but I had stayed out of the negotiations. It was the first time I had truly stepped back, allowing the Sterling brothers to face their own history without my intervention. Word had reached me recently that the transplant had been a success. Julian was recovering in a private clinic in Munich, and for the first time in their lives, the three brothers were navigating a relationship with a family member they couldn't manipulate. Marcus hadn't just saved Julian's life. He had forced the Sterlings to expand their narrow, cold definition of family. Now, with the threat of the brothers permanently neutralized by both gratitude and the lingering shadow of their exposed crimes, I turned my focus to the final task Marcus had set for me. In his very last video, the one marked for the day the glass is clear, he had spoken about the someday canvas, a massive circular frame he had commissioned, intended to be the centerpiece of the manor's great hall. "It's blank, Nora," he had said on the screen, his voice soft but filled with a profound expectation. "Because I couldn't paint the ending of a story I wouldn't be there to witness. This house, the quartz, the money, they are just the tools. The real inheritance is the possibility of what you will create next. I want you to fill that frame with something that captures the light we found together and the light you are finding now on your own." I had spent the last 3 months in the glass-blowing studio, working with a fervor I hadn't felt since my youth. I wasn't painting with oils or charcoal. I was painting with glass. I had designed a monumental stained glass rose window, 6 feet in diameter, to be set into the circular stone niche above the main fireplace. It was my most ambitious project, a technical nightmare of heat, chemistry, and structural integrity that required every ounce of the skill Marcus had helped me reclaim. Today was the installation. Ellis and a team of specialized craftsmen were hoisting the final segment into place. Sarah had flown in from Atlanta to witness the moment, standing beside me with her hand linked in mine. We watched in silence as the heavy leaded panels were secured. The design was not a traditional landscape. It was a fluid, abstract representation of the Cypress Marsh. At the bottom, deep ambers and dark, opaque violets represented the roots of the forest and the heavy secrets of the past. Moving upward, the glass transitioned into brilliant teals and emeralds, mimicking the water of the marsh and the life Marcus had breathed back into the estate. But the center of the window was a burst of pure, radiant gold and crystalline white, the high-purity quartz brought to life through light. As the sun hit the perfect angle, the window ignited. It threw long, kaleidoscopic shadows across the stone floor, painting the room in colors I had never seen before. The ambers, greens, and golds swirled together, creating a visual bridge between the dark earth and the open sky. "It's beautiful, Mom," Sarah whispered, her eyes reflecting the dancing prisms. "It looks like peace." "It is peace," I replied. I looked at the window and saw our entire journey. I saw Marcus's architectural precision in the lead lines, my artistic soul in the vibrant colors, and Sarah's future in the way the light passed through the glass to illuminate the path ahead. It was a symbol of the new Sterling family, one built on transparency instead of secrets, on choice instead of obligation. Later that evening, the house grew quiet. Sarah was in the library, caught up in a book, and Ellis was making his final rounds of the stables. I walked to the glass desk and opened the tablet one last time. There were no more videos. The 365 days had passed. The final file was a simple audio recording, a few seconds long. "Good night, Nora," Marcus's voice said, sounding as clear as if he were standing right behind me. "You did it. You kept the fire going. I love you." I closed the tablet and looked up at my window. The moonlight was now filtering through the glass, casting a silver, ethereal glow over the room. The forbidden marsh had become my sanctuary. The man I had loved for 30 years had kept secrets, yes, but he had kept them like a gardener keeps seeds, waiting for the right season to let them bloom into a forest that would protect me forever. I felt a profound sense of closure. The war was over. The legacy was secure. The mineral wealth of the northern marsh would ensure that Sarah and her children would never know the want that had driven the Sterling brothers to madness. But the true wealth was right here, in the light I had shaped with my own hands. I walked to the fireplace, the embers glowing softly beneath my stained glass masterpiece. I realized then that Marcus hadn't just built a house. He had built a bridge for me to cross from the person I was to the person I was always meant to be. I was no longer just the widow of Marcus Sterling. I was Eleanor, the artist of Cypress Marsh. And as I looked out at the dark, starlit forest, I knew that for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of the shadows. I had the light, I had the fire, and I had the freedom to choose exactly what came next. The story of the Forbidden Farm had ended, but the story of the glass manor was only just beginning. I turned off the lights, leaving the room to be guarded by the moon and the magnificent colored shadows of my own creation. Tomorrow would bring new work, new light, and a future I was finally ready to inhabit. Until then, the marsh was silent, and my heart was finally completely at home. What do you think about everything that unfolded? Was the truth always there, just waiting to be seen? If you were in my place, would you have made the same choices or walked away sooner when it started to feel wrong? Wherever you are, I hope you're taking care of yourself and staying well through whatever life brings.